Hello everyone and welcome to Slash Film Daily for Monday, March 19th, 2019. On today's episode, we're going to talk about what we've been up to at the water cooler. This is Slash Film Editor-in-Chief, Peter Sciretta. Joining me on today's podcast is Slash Film Managing Editor, Jacob Hall.
Hello, hello.
Weekend Editor, Brad Oman.
Hey, that's me.
Senior Writer, Ben Pearson.
Hey, what's going on?
Writers, Hoai-Tran.
Hey everyone.
And Chris, Evangelista.
Hello, folks.
Okay, we haven't recorded a water cooler episode in over 2 weeks, so we have a lot to talk about collectively. I don't have a lot to talk about. I haven't been doing much. I've been going on some set visits. I've been doing some interviews for the site, most of which some of which you'll see later this week. But Jacob, you've been busy at the South by Southwest Film Festival. We recorded an episode about that yesterday, but there's a lot going on around that festival that isn't movies. So what have you been getting yourself involved in?
Getting myself involved in a lot of lines and a lot of traffic and a lot of trying to avoid the other corners of South by Southwest, namely interactive and music. Interactive brings all the tech bros to town, and it brings all the brands to town. And this year, Uber brought an army of rentable scooters, which led to all the tech bros renting these scooters and driving the wrong way down one-way streets, not avoiding, going through stop signs, not following traffic laws, and generally making the already busy downtown Austin into a bona fide nightmare.
Wait, does Austin not normally have these scooter things?
They have a couple of them. They're scattered, but Uber literally brought a massive fleet of them and then just turned them loose during a festival where tens of thousands of people get extremely drunk and then visit a city they do not know the layout of. And it was, as far as I know, no one was seriously hurt. There were no accidents. But when you're driving down a one-way street and suddenly a fleet of people on scooters are coming at you in a lane, it is... Some of us need to get us act together. This is rough. This is a rough week for actually being on the ground and trying to cover a film festival, Peter.
Yeah. And you got to experience some of the gaming stuff going on in South by?
This is the third year I went to South by Southwest Gaming, which takes place in the last few days of the fest. It's kind of like steadily growing. It's not like a big thing yet. And in past years, it's been a pretty even mixture of video games and tabletop, a combination of events and panels, vendors, demos, things for sale. This year, I was very much let down. The tabletop presence was almost non-existent. Most of the show floor was video game demos with extremely long lines. It felt like, either by accident or design, the attempt was to recreate something like PAX, which is a very popular gaming convention, where the whole idea is to stand in line and try to demo indie games or demo major games or try new products. And it just felt like it was too much crammed into too small of a space, and I missed the variety of everything from past years. But I'm hoping this is just a growing pain, hoping that Southwest Gaming can continue to become something worthwhile. But however, I want to end this on a positive note. I was able to have dinner with some dear friends of the site and contributors. Chris came down, which he'll discuss in a second, for the final few days of the fest. So me, Chris, Meredith Borders, and Matt Donato all had dinner together at the Clay Pit, an Indian restaurant in Austin. And it was incredibly fun to see everybody. The other main slashing contributor who was writing for us, Joy Child, had already left town, so she couldn't make it. But it's always fun when you're exchanging dozens of emails with people to work on stories, when you're constantly on Slack, all day, every day, trying to, make sure news is going up and make sure things are going smoothly. Remembering that the people you're talking to are human beings and not just an algorithm you're talking to is always very fun. And I had a great time catching up with everybody. And I know Chris had not met Meredith and Matt before, even though Chris and Matt actually share a column on the site. So that was really fun to, introduce everybody. Speaking of food, I discovered that I may have a dormant seafood allergy. So I spent the back half of Southwest covered in hives, which are finally healing, Peter. So it was a very, very interesting week full of very, very...
I do have to ask you, Jacob, what did you eat at the Indian restaurant?
Oh, yes. Since I did stay on my diet the entire week, I just got some kebab appetizers. I got grilled lamb, grilled paneer, which is a type of cheese, and grilled chicken. and they served it, in seasoned in a bed of vegetables. So it was very, very healthy and sensible. I mean, yes, I missed the garlic naan and I missed the rice, but it was very, very good. And Clay Pit is a very good restaurant. So, and I'm sure Chris will have something to say about the food in Austin as well, because he was able to explore this city's strange delights more than I could. And now that I'm home, my new project is I built a spreadsheet, and I decided I'm going to catalog my entire library, Peter. I am going to all my books, all my comics, all my movies, all my board games. I'm going to have a spreadsheet broken up by...
By the way, I wouldn't create a spreadsheet. There's actually apps to do this, Jacob.
I need a spreadsheet, Peter, for how I want to do this, because my spreadsheet is not just like title and author. It's location in my home. It is whether it's part of a set or a collection. It's whether it's signed or out of print. It is very, very specific, and I decided I'd rather build my own than rely on this. Also, I want to be able to combine all my media into one thing, and all the best apps need to be like just books or just movies, and I want to be able to fully customize everything to my heart's content. But if anybody out there thinks I'm wrong or thinks can endorse a product or an app, feel free to let me know. I'm only 123 books into the cataloging so far, and that was just 2 stacks against the wall of my office. So I still have maybe about 6 months of work to go. I'll keep you updated if it's not too boring.
Wow. Brad, you've actually been cataloging your movie collection?
Yeah, actually, I just recently started to do this because I kind of wanted a different way to keep everything organized rather than just having a document available somewhere. And like because I usually have a Word doc that I use to keep it updated, but that I can't take that with me, and I can easily transfer it to a Google Doc and so that I can have it everywhere. But I stumbled upon this app from the Sort It family of apps, where they basically have a whole an app that allows you to track tons of different collections, whether it's comic books, albums, toy cars, board games, action figures, Pez dispensers, shoes, like basically.
Wait, do you catalog it all in one app?
Well, so there's from what I can tell, there's an app that has all these different things within it, but then it looks like there are also separate apps for your collection, for your separate collections as well, if you want to. I don't know if they all have separate apps, because I didn't go and search through some of them, because obviously I don't have a wine collection, so I'm not looking for that app. And what's cool about it, at least with...
By the way, imagine if you needed an app to catalog your whole collection of wine. Like, that would be insane.
But so what's cool about this, with the movies especially, is that you catalog them by scanning the barcode. So once you scan it, like, it has all the information related to that movie in there. The only thing that is somewhat tedious about it occasionally is there are certain movies or certain collections, if you have all the movies like in one box, that you have to go and search out the right version if you want it documented properly. So that can be a little annoying at times if you have a larger collection. It happens a little bit more frequently than you might like. And just the process of scanning them is a little bit tedious anyway. There is the option to do a bulk scan where you scan a bunch of them instead of having to do one by one. But if you want that, you do have to pay the $10 for access to the full app, but that also allows you to do other stuff too, like transfer the lists to your computer and do a bunch of different things that you otherwise wouldn't be able to do with the free version of the app. So I've been making my way through my movie collection. Like I said, it's a little bit tedious, but I think it'll be worth it in the end. And I'll probably end up doing this with some of my collectibles and vinyl and stuff like that too, just so that I can have it all in a central place somewhere.
Yeah, I used to have 3,000 DVDs, and I had like some app that I used to catalog it, and I actually would every year I'd print out a new catalog, kind of like I guess Blockbuster used to have a catalog in their stores of like all my collection. So you could like look at this book that was in like a 3-ring binder, and every page just had like the pictures of all the DVD covers. and a little bit of info next to them, and it was my entire collection. Which I guess you could have just went over to a wall and looked at the spines of them, but it provided a little bit more info. You're not planning on doing any of that, I'm assuming.
No, that's far too extensive for me. And plus, since I have like a physical representation of my library, so you can just go over to the shelf and look and see what's there, and I'm sure if they don't know what a certain movie is, anyone who happens to be here and picking a movie, they can just ask me.
But the cool thing with these apps is you can sort them. So like if someone's over your house and they're like they want to see a comedy, you can go to the app and sort by comedy and show them all the comedies you have instead of going through. I'm sure your shelf at this point is kind of massive, right?
Yeah, I have 3 Billy shelves from IKEA, and not every shelf is full of movies. Like the top 2 shelves on each shelf, I have like collectibles and stuff on, but all of the rest of the shelves below them are all movies.
Yeah. So I guess
Dune also has the ability to organize by genre. A spreadsheet you design, you click the genre column, and it organizes them all by your genre that you put together.
Peter, what app do you use again?
I don't use an app because I do. Most of my movies are digital these days, so I am the only one on this podcast that believes in the future. Everybody else here is living in the past. So, Brad, what have you been doing this week?
Pretty much 2 weeks ago now, since it's been so long since we've done a water cooler, I went to Victoria, British Columbia in Canada for a set visit. I can say what set I was visiting. It's for The Boy 2, which is a sequel to the horror movie The Boy. You can watch the original movie on Netflix right now. They were shooting up in Victoria, British Columbia, so we got to watch them shoot for a little while and visit the set. And we also visited Craigdarroch Castle, which is the setting of the first movie, where it pretty much entirely takes place. So that was really cool. I can't really talk about anything else about the set visit other than that I was actually there. So we'll have a report on that whenever the embargo lifts sometime later this year. So stay tuned for that. But it was cool. I'd never been to Victoria, British Columbia before, so I did some wandering around the city and checked out some of the local comic book shops and vinyl stores and that kind of thing. And it's kind of cool. It has it's almost like they took a big city but shrunk it down. It feels like a very rural metropolis, if that makes sense. Like it has like medium-sized buildings in their downtown area, and it feels like you're in the middle of like a shrunken down Chicago, I guess. Tons of restaurants. Like I've honestly, even in Chicago, you don't see this many different restaurants in such a small area. So it was a cool area to be, and plus, everyone in Canada is so nice and cool anyway. Like it was just a fun little trip.
Yeah, and you've also been preparing for an improv comedy show?
Yeah, so I want to say it's been like a year and a half, maybe a little bit more. I used to do improv with a friend of mine who we also did stand-up comedy together around the same time when we were running a comedy club. But it's been a while just because I had to stop doing it since I did my transition to teaching program. And I hadn't gone back, but our old improv troupe is doing a charity comedy show for the charity organization that my friend runs here in town, that we put on these like adult-oriented events like an 80s prom and like inappropriate trivia and things like that to support certain local organizations with funds from these shows. So an improv show is happening this coming weekend. All the proceeds are going to charity, and since they're performing, they actually asked me and my friend Ben if we wanted to like come back and do some of the show with them. So we hadn't rehearsed with them in a while, and this past weekend we went and kind of picked it back up. And it was a little bit rough, but it was, once we got back into the groove, we felt really comfortable, and it was a really fun rehearsal. So I'm just excited to kind of get back on stage and do it. I love doing improv comedy. It's one of my favorite things to do. And yeah, so that's happening this weekend, which should be pretty fun.
So if people are in the area, how can they come see this?
I mean, if you're in the area where I live, I would be very surprised. But if you want to check it out for whatever reason, if you go to Facebook and look up Big Comedy LaPorte, we have the link to tickets on there. It's on brown paper tickets, and I think there's only like 20 some tickets left. It's almost sold out. There's a total of like 200 seats in the theater. So if you want to see it, then go there and check it out.
So if you're close to LaPorte, Indiana, check that out. Chris, you were, as Jacob mentioned, you were in Austin. What did you see while you were in town?
Well, I saw all the stuff Jacob mentioned, which included, drunken people on scooters. And I don't know if it was because it was a combination of South by Southwest and St. Patrick's Day, but I don't know how anyone can survive living in Austin, because I don't think I met a single sober person the entire time I was there. Everyone was just constantly wasted, including me. Basically, you just wake up and you drink, and you're just drinking all night. And by the last day I was there, I was actually like ready to go, because I felt like if I had stayed another day, I would probably get alcohol poisoning. I don't know if, like I said, I don't know if it's like that all the time, or if it's just because of.
It definitely is. Like the first, I wouldn't say like probably 5 times I had been to Austin. It was either for South by or Fantastic Fest. And I feel like you get that kind of experience in both of those things. But then once I went to Austin outside of those things, Austin is a lot calmer outside of the festival scene. Would you say, Jacob?
Yeah, I mean, if you go downtown and hit 6th Street, which is, alcohol tourism district, you will find an atmosphere constantly. But people in this town really love their alcohol, but they like to celebrate. But I'd say, most of the year it's more of a have a beer and relax vibe, and not a have a beer and run through the streets punching things vibe.
So, aside from drinking, Chris, what were you doing in Austin?
I was there for the world premiere of Pet Sematary, the remake / new adaptation, which debuted there, and I also did the junket for the film, which was a very long day. I was basically it was like 4 hours worth of going from person to person to interview them, and that was great. And I'll talk about the movie when we get down to the watching section. And in addition to all that, I also went to an Alamo Drafthouse for the first time in my life, because I've never been to one, and I went to the South Lamar location. I went there twice, actually. I went there one day before the Pet Sematary screening because I had time to kill, and I also went there the last day I was there, because after I wrapped up my interviews, I was there until the next morning. So I went there twice, and it's good. I don't know if it was as like life-changing as some people have made it out to be, where like they make it sound like it's like the holy grail of going to the movies, but it was definitely nice to be in a theater and be able to just, put a piece of paper in front of me that says "Bring me more beer," and that was so. Yeah, it was an interesting experience.
How did you feel about people eating? So, because this is a theater to be made to eat in, and I know you're not fond of other moviegoers eating in your presence.
It wasn't too bad, because what happened? Well, the first film I saw, I got there as the credits were as the previews were running, so I didn't really notice a lot. The second film, I got there early, and most people ordered their food like a good 20 minutes before the movie even started. So by the time it started, most people were done eating, except for people getting like additional stuff. And every once in a while, the server would walk in front of me, like trying to crouch down to stay out of the way, but I would still see her, and that got slightly distracting. But other than that, it was not as bad. It certainly was not as bad as movie theaters around me, where people are just fucking munching away on like the loudest goddamn things in the world. So yeah.
Okay, HT, what have you been up to this week?
Well, this was also last week, in which I got to see the Pixies and Weezer at their sort of double billed concert at Madison Square Garden. And this is actually the second time I've seen Weezer. I saw them, I think, like 2 years ago, a year ago, when I was living in DC. And they, at the time, were doing a double billing concert tour with Panic at the Disco. I thought it was just really funny how the crowds for Weezer just like vary incredibly. So when they were performing with Panic at the Disco, there were a lot of teen girls there who were very excited for the guy in Panic at the Disco, who I'm forgetting his name for. And as soon as Weezer came on, they all left. And then this time with Pixies and Weezer, it was a much older crowd, as you could expect, with a fair amount of families too. I was surprised to see like 5-year-old kids brought in with like their dads and stuff, but it was a fun time. Weezer and the Pixies played like their best hits. The Weezer especially played like a lot of the Blue album, which I was fond of growing up, so I was really excited to hear all of that. And at one point, Rivers Cuomo like went on sort of this sort of boat-like structure that took him through the crowd, and I thought that was a funny little moment. I don't know, maybe that was just me, like Rivers on a boat, but they also played quite a lot of the Teal album, which is their recent release of all the covers of all of like Weezer covers of popular hits like Toto's Africa and everything. And that was something that Rivers seemed to really enjoy playing and the crowd really enjoyed. But I was a little bit distressed that Africa got like a bigger sort of reaction from the audience than the Sweater Song, which is one of my favorite songs. So I was just like, it's okay as long as Rivers is having a good time. So I had a good time seeing them, and it was a fun concert.
Well, very cool. Let's move on to what we've been reading. Chris, with all this travel, I assume you brought some books with you?
No, this wasn't while I was traveling. I'm, as everyone knows, I'm terrified to fly, and I don't think I could concentrate on like a book if I were flying. But I have been reading. It's called Bad Blood: Secrets and Lies in a Silicon Valley Startup. And this is about Elizabeth Holmes. HBO actually just aired a documentary about this last night, and there's also a podcast about it. And I think Adam McKay is making a movie about it. It's a big story. But Elizabeth Holmes, she was this 19-year-old entrepreneur, and she started this company called Theranos. And they claim to be able to do all this extensive blood work with just a simple pinprick on your finger, which scientists and medical professors know is not possible at all. But she said it was, and she was so convincing that she was able to just start this massive billion-dollar company. And for a few years, she kept it going by just basically lying about everything. She just kept saying her technology worked, and very, very slowly. So
this is like a Billy McFarland situation?
Yeah, but even more serious because she's, dealing with medicine and sick people and very, very slowly people began to catch on that she was just completely full of shit. And it's just this fascinating story because what's fascinating about it is, in retrospect, you can see how, fake it all is. Like reading about it now, you can tell how it's clear that she's making all this up, but she was so convincing that so many people just went along with it. And it's just this great story about how people are very willing to be suckered. And I think in the last few years, particularly, we've learned how willing people are to just be lied to and believe it unconditionally. So yeah. It's a very good book. I recommend it.
Yeah, especially when the lie is something we want to believe.
Right.
Yeah. Jacob, what have you been reading?
Well, I was hoping to keep up my book a week plan during South by Southwest, and it collapsed almost instantly. But since South by, I started reading John Darnell's Wolf in White Van. I'm almost done with it. I was hoping to have it finished for this podcast. I have 50 pages left, but even then, I can recommend this book wholeheartedly. This is the first book from John Darnell. Maybe it's the second book. It's an early book from John Darnell, who's most known as the lead singer-songwriter of the Mountain Goats. And this book has a really fascinating structure and really moving personal prose. It's about it's told out of order and things are revealed very slowly, so I don't want to tip my hand too much. It's about a disfigured man who runs a role-playing game service through the mail where you send in your moves to him by letter and he sends back what you do. And it's about how his game inspires two young people to take it too seriously, and one of them is killed, and he has to go answer for himself at a hearing to see if the families of the victim can hold him responsible. And the book flashes forward between this hearing, before the hearing, after the hearing, his childhood, the reason he's disfigured. It flashes into the game itself and the world he created, and it's just this fascinating, moving, terrifying examination of the worlds we build and why we choose to create our own worlds to escape within. And and why the allure of fantasy and how fantasy poisons us. It's really dark stuff, but it goes down surprisingly easy. I think in the same way that his songwriting is often so dark, but delivered in a way that's very melodic and truthful and relatable. And that's Wolf and White Van. It's actually a pretty short read, just over 200 pages. I've read it, most of it in 2 sittings, and I recommend it wholeheartedly. I think HT will be pleased to know that I just burned through the first 4 volumes, hardcover volumes, the first 24 chapters, however much of the series that is, Full Metal Alchemist, which I'd started, thought was fun, and then just and then sit down again to keep reading, and I'm full on obsessed with it now. HT, this is one of my favorite worlds I've ever encountered in fiction. I feel like I'm gonna pull up the writer artist's name, Hiromu Arakawa. Her world building tactics, I feel like so much fiction feels the need to pause to explain its world. It feels the need to, dump the exposition on you early on to say, okay, now you're armed for the journey ahead. Whereas this one just says, okay, we're going to root you with these characters in this really strange, alternate 19th century European anime world or manga world. And we're going to explain things as necessary for you to know them. And by the end of the first 4 volumes, first 24 chapters, however you want to call it, I was very much on board of this world, understanding its rules, and I was surprised by how much the context of the art and the writing was able to slip into me as opposed to it being dumped on me. I feel like a lot of creators, both people working in film, TV, comics, manga, should look at this and take a lesson in how effortless it makes it feel. HT, what lies ahead for me? To give you an idea, I just finished the chapter that was the extended flashback to the main character's childhoods. So, where am I going next? Give me a tease.
Things get even more. There's sort of some disparate threads going on. So, in the sort of more micro level of the storytelling, there's a lot of political intrigue and some really great arcs that have to do with the supporting characters. And things also get much more mythic at the end. So in addition to the world building, you see this world and story just becomes much grander than you anticipate. And you get to meet some fan favorite characters along the way too. One of my favorite things about the series is just how rich and complex all the characters are. And that even though this series does mine a lot of like tragedy and just like really horrific events, it never like becomes just too bleak and overwhelming. So I'm excited for where you're headed. Yes, I think you're going to be seeing a lot of great things ahead.
Yeah. Well, I've decided that since they're re-releasing the whole series in these really nice hardcovers, that I think each one is the equivalent of 2 paperbacks. So I'm going to be steadily buying those as they release them every few months. So I'll keep you updated, HT, as to where I am. I think the next one's out in either April or May. But speaking of me trying to fill in holes in my manga knowledge, trying to better appreciate the Japanese comics industry, I read some about more Junjie Ito, who is probably the most terrifying comics artist on the planet. And I've read some of his stuff before, but I've not read his Shivers collection, which is just a bunch of stories from across his career, some of them early on, some of them more modern, that he's collected into one volume. And like a lot of short story collections, it's hit and miss, but nobody draws a more terrifying image than Junjie Ito. There's stuff that he's drawn where seeing it in context or out of context, it is deeply upsetting and disconcerting. And the storytelling is sometimes very crystal clear and sometimes deliberately opaque. Sometimes the storytelling isn't as good as the art. Sometimes it's as good. I feel like this collection especially sometimes seems to value a creepy image over a good story, which I don't think is always the case with some of his later work. But I was really impressed with this collection, and I really enjoyed his somewhat self-deprecating intros to his individual stories, where he would explain his process and be very humble about the fact that, this is from early in my career. Maybe it didn't work out as well as it could have. I apologize. HT, I think we've talked about Junjie Ito offline before. How much of his work have you read?
I haven't read that much just because it really disturbs me and like I can't really read a lot of his things without just having nightmares for weeks. I know he's been compared to David Cronenberg, and that's a very apt comparison. His stories get into that body horror, especially, and just like some really disturbing, harrowing imagery. I watched there's an anime adaptation of one of his collections on Crunchyroll, which is really good, but it's not quite as just fully unnerving as his mangas are. But yeah, Junjie Ito is good, and I acknowledge how good he is, but I don't think I can really read a lot of his stuff.
Yeah, I felt really gross when I finished his collection because I feel like even though I'm looking at flat printed paper, I feel like I can smell and touch the texture of his art in a way that's very, very upsetting.
Very cool. Let's talk about what we've been watching. I have only a few things to talk about on today's edition. I did get sent the screeners for the second season of Cobra Kai. I know everybody listening and you guys know that Cobra Kai was my favorite thing that I saw last year in terms of television, and probably the second favorite thing I saw overall of last year. So if you've not seen Cobra Kai season 1 on YouTube Premium, I highly recommend it. I saw all 10 episodes of the second season. I don't think I'm supposed to give my reaction for all 10. I think the first 2 screened at South by, so there's they've released the embargo. I'm talking about the first 2. I will say that this season starts off directly after the cliffhanger that season 1 kind of ends off on, and I guess by now that I can say this publicly, but it basically introduces Martin Kove, who played Sensei John Kreese from the Karate Kid movies. He appears, and in that season we don't really know how he is going to play a factor in this season. And what we suspect, the thing I love about this show is it always takes your expectations of where things are going and kind of flips it on its ear. And even how John Kreese is involved in this season, in this first episode, is kind of not exactly what you expect. And I kind of love that. This season does some stuff like that in interesting ways. I don't think this is as clever as the first season. The first season played more off of moments and training ideas from the original Karate Kid film, and this season has a lot more originality, which I guess is a good thing, but it loses some bit in nostalgia. And when it does reference things, when it does reference moments from the movies, it does so in more obvious and glaring ways. Like they'll, mention someone and all of a sudden cut to a clip of a flashback from the movies. Do you know what I mean? And to the point that my girlfriend Kitra was making fun of how many times they had, quote unquote flashbacks in the show. But this season opens. That first season is about Daniel LaRusso and Johnny Lawrence, their feud being resparked after all these years. And this season opens the world up quite a bit. It's a much bigger story. It introduces a lot of new characters, including Paul Walter Hauser, who was in I, Tonya and Black Klansman. And he is a Home Depot employee who has an interest in being, a karate person. So he brings some comedy to this season that I think is funny. This season is also a lot more cheesy than the first season. It embraces its 80s roots of the original movies. I think people are going to like it. I would recommend it based on the first 2 episodes, because I can't say anything about the other episodes, but maybe I'll talk about those at a later time. I did also go see a junket screening of Disney's live-action adaptation of Dumbo. This is the movie that is directed by Tim Burton. Now, I'm going to say my experience with these Disney live-action adaptations have been kind of 50-50. I liked Jungle Book, and I enjoyed Cinderella, but the other 2 I kind of hated. I hated Beauty and the Beast, and what was the other one? Anybody?
Maleficent?
Well, I guess that's not an adaptation.
Cinderella?
No, I like Cinderella a little bit. Oh, okay. Well, anyways, but it's been either you love it, you hate it. I was not particularly looking forward to Dumbo. Dumbo's it's also Dumbo's a 60-minute film that was made a long time ago, and this movie is nearly 2 hours. And Tim Burton hasn't made anything in live action that I've actually really enjoyed since, I guess, maybe over a decade. I would say that this is definitely his best live action film since maybe, I guess, Sweeney Todd or around that era. It has incredible art, production design, costume design. Like, I don't see how it won't be nominated for all that kind of stuff at the end of the year. Burton creates this interesting visual world. So many of the frames look like a painting. There's fun nods for both fans of the original animated movie and Disneyland fanatics, because this movie, actually, it's interesting. This movie, the first 40 minutes of this movie is basically an adaptation of the original. And then the rest of the film is kind of like a sequel. So I think this is worth seeing over the general live action adaptation, because it has a lot more to say about it. And the second part of this movie kind of takes place in like a Disneyland type theme park. And that's interesting. I'm surprised at there's a big animal rights message here that I think is gonna make some people happy and piss off other people. I think Tim Burton got this right. Michael Keaton plays a version of kind of like a Walt Disney Trump mashup. If that sounds interesting to you, see this movie. I'm not gonna say this is a great film, but it was much better than I was expecting it to be. And the third film I saw was Shazam. I saw the first screening of Shazam. This is the movie starring Zachary Levi, who it's basically a wish fulfillment. He becomes a superhero. It's based on DC Comics title of the same name. Or actually, isn't it of Captain Marvel? What is Shazam based off of, Jacob?
Shazam is now named Shazam officially in the comics, but he originally was named Captain Marvel.
Yeah.
In the comic series Captain Marvel, that trademark lapsed, so Captain Marvel then starred in the series Shazam. Then when that got confusing, they just made the whole thing Shazam. It's a whole thing. We actually have an article coming this week that will explain all of this. Look for that soon.
Yeah, it's very confusing. Anyways, this is joy-filled wish fulfillment. It's fun. It's funny. It's a bit more over the top and cheesy than I thought it was going to be. I feel like they really capture like the kind of like dysfunctional family aspect of like the John Hughes films, like Home Alone, and obviously it's playing off of like Big and those kind of movies. It feels like a movie that was made in the 90s. It doesn't feel like something that was made today. And the score kind of emulates Williams and Elfman, and it has a lot of heart. And I think the villain is a little bit generic and one note, and but it definitely feels like the biggest 180-degree turn from the Snyder era of the, it feels like we're doing something new, and it's very family friendly. You can take your kids to see this, and it wears its heart on its sleeve. And I liked it. I'm more lukewarm on it than other critics. I know, HT, you also saw this film, right?
Yeah. So all the reasons that you were listing just now with your sort of less enthusiastic tone.
Was it backhanded compliments?
Is all the reasons I really enjoyed this film. Yeah. I enjoyed its cheesiness. I enjoyed its sincerity. I think that throwback to 90s, early 2000s superhero films, was very much in line with why I fell in love with superhero movies in the first place. It felt very much like a sort of Sam Raimi throwback. And yeah, some of the moments were a little bit overtly cheesy, but I thought it was so in line with this character who is nicknamed the Big Cheese. Zachary Levi is just so effortlessly charming in this role, which feels like it was made for him. And I'm so it was such a delight from start to finish. The film has a lot of laughs, a lot of heart. And I especially love that the found family aspect too, because it kind of ties down this character in a way that we don't really see a lot of superhero characters, that they have this sort of more, this backup system. And I like that a lot. Like, I remember, Peter, when you're talking about Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse and how you really wanted to get to know all of these characters more, and you got really interested in reading about their comics and their stories. That was the reaction I had to Shazam after I saw it, because I was so enamored with all of these characters, and Shazam especially. And this was a character that I had not really delved into. Even though I am a DC Comics fan, I haven't really read a lot of Shazam or watched a lot of Shazam things. But after this, I was like, where is the next Shazam comic book or animated movie I can watch? Because I just had a blast watching this film. This is a movie that I think impacted me almost as much as Wonder Woman when I saw it. I really enjoyed it. And yeah, I think it's really great and really funny, and I'm a little sad that you don't like it as much as me, Peter, but it's okay.
Hey, I don't want to sound like I'm hating on this movie, because I really did enjoy it, and I would recommend this over Dumbo for sure. But I do feel like, I don't know, and you know what, you did mention like that found family aspect of this movie is the biggest thing. I don't think they're promoting it all in the trailers and stuff. And that was the biggest surprise to me, is how much heart that part of the story had. And I kind of like that more than the superhero stuff, to be honest with you. And I feel like, not to get into spoilers, but there's some stuff that happens in the third act that it's kind of a surprise that I wasn't particularly on board for, but I guess I understand how it could work, for someone who loves, enjoys more kind of cheesy stuff. That makes sense. Yeah. Okay. So, that is what I've been watching. Brad, what have you been watching?
So many things. So before I left to visit the set of The Boy 2, I watched The Boy because I hadn't seen it yet. And if I'm really honest, I didn't watch it because when I saw the trailer, it just didn't look good to me. It looked like a familiar story we had already seen before. It had like this Night of the Living Dummy vibe, because it's about this woman played by Lauren Cohan from The Walking Dead, who goes to this old house where there's this couple who has a son that she's going to be a nanny for, and she learns that the boy she's being a nanny for is this porcelain doll that's like 2.5, 3 feet tall, and this old couple takes care of it like it's their real son. And so she kind of goes along with it, and there's all these rules and stuff. And it's kind of feels like your typical movie where there's a horror movie like this, where there's weird things that are happening, and obviously there's something weird about the doll, and something supernatural is going on. And it's a little bit slow and hard to get invested in. But I will tell you, if you watch it, you will be rewarded with an amazing third act that does something completely unexpected that I was absolutely floored by when I saw it. It comes out of nowhere. It changes everything about that happens in the movie, that in the earlier part of the movie, and I think it's worth watching. It's fun. It's a cool twist on it, and you just won't expect it by any means. Have any of you guys seen The Boy?
I have not. I suspect this is more Chris Jacob territory.
Yeah, I've seen it.
Yeah, The Boy's good. My issue with The Boy is that the really, really incredible third act was done in a very different way, but like in a similar structure in another film. Who just naming it could spoil it, so I'm not going to say it. But it shares a twist with a extremely great foreign horror film that I saw first, and I don't think the writers of The Boy saw, because it's just different enough. So the wind was a little taken out for that reason, but I think The Boy is real good.
There you go. And then while I was up in Victoria, British Columbia, I happened to see that The Wandering Earth was playing nearby, and it wasn't super close back here at home at the time. So I went out of my way to hit up a theater in Canada to see it. And I'm so glad I did, and I'm even more glad that I saw it on a big screen, because it is a true blockbuster. We've talked about this before because it's such a huge movie overseas. It's already like this huge hit in China. They're like their biggest blockbuster ever, basically. and this is one hell of a production. It's basically China's version of Armageddon, but it has elements of The Day After Tomorrow and Snowpiercer and some other big disaster sci-fi movies thrown into it. And I don't love everything about it. It's definitely a little bit outlandish at times, but no more outlandish than something like Armageddon. And it's thoroughly entertaining. The cast is fantastic. The special effects aren't always the best, but they're very good, all things considered. And it's a very big, fun blockbuster movie, and I was really glad that I saw it in theaters.
Very cool. What else have you been watching?
And then I saw on the plane back, I watched Shoplifters, which is a fantastic movie. I know HT has seen it before and loved it, and I was very happy to. I really enjoyed it as well. It's very touching and endearing. The family at the center of it is just it's so lovely. It's this little makeshift family. Of thieves and that kind of thing. It's just a very a heartwarming movie, and definitely sad. But I really liked what it what it has to say about this, just what family is. Even to people who aren't necessarily a real family. I also watched,
and that's on Hulu now, I think.
Yes, that's available on Hulu now. Yeah, just recently became available on there.
So HT's favorite movie of last year. Go see it.
Yes.
I also watched Teen Titans Go to the Movies because it was one of the few things that fit in my remaining flight time after I watched Shoplifters, and I was just kind of curious about it. And it's actually not bad. It is it's very kid-centric, very much geared towards a younger audience, especially when it comes to the comedy. But there's some solid jokes in there, and there's even some darker jokes in there, because there's a whole bit in this movie where so the whole gist of it is Robin desperately wants his own movie, but he's not a big enough superhero to get his own movie. So in order to do it, they just casually decide to time travel and get rid of all the other cooler superheroes so that Robin is now a big deal. But when they
kill the superheroes?
They don't kill the superheroes, but they stop their origins from taking place. So they go back and save Bruce Wayne's family. And they stop Krypton from being destroyed. So none of these superheroes actually come to exist on Earth. But then when they come back, Earth is in absolute chaos, and supervillains have destroyed everything. So they go back and undo it. But it's funny to see, because when they go back and undo it, they basically go back and make sure that Bruce Wayne's parents get killed. So it's a little bit dark. But it was pretty funny. I didn't love it, but for what it is, especially for kids, it was an enjoyable mix-up of kind of the superhero genre, and it's definitely a wackier comedy installment for superheroes. I also saw How to Train Your Dragon 3, which I loved as a conclusion to this franchise. Very touching. I love just the dynamic between Hiccup and Toothless is so moving, and you really just feel like you've spent so much time with these characters. And it was a great send-off for them. It was visually stunning as well, as all of the How to Train Your Dragon movies have been. And it definitely made me sad that this franchise is over. But I'm glad that they gave it a fitting ending. And I felt like this was also the one time where they really did more with the supporting cast. Hiccup's friends got a little bit more time to do more than they did in the previous movies, which I appreciated. Even though it wasn't much, I felt like they had a better moment to shine in this movie than the other movies. What, Peter?
I was just going to say, agreed. I really enjoyed it. You also saw Captain Marvel.
Saw Captain Marvel. Loved Captain Marvel. It's fantastic. I love the how this movie approaches modern day topics, even though it's set in the 90s. It has a lot more to say about relevant issues that are plaguing us today than the trailer indicates, which I think is smart because it comes as a surprise. I love the way that they handle the Skrulls in this movie. I love Brie Larson as Captain Marvel. Samuel Jackson is great as Nick Fury. The visual effects used to bring him to a younger version of himself are unbelievable. It looks like Sam Jackson from the 90s. It was brought back. It felt like the version of him that you see in The Negotiator was in this movie. Goose the cat, incredible. But Ben Mendelsohn is the MVP of this movie without a doubt. He is so great in this movie in a variety of ways. There are so many things that he does in this movie that I absolutely love. And it makes me want to see Ben Mendelsohn do more comedy things. Like, he's been relegated to being kind of a villain, sort of an overseer character. And I think that he really has some good comedic chops. And I'd like to see those utilized a little bit more freely.
And Jacob, you also finally saw Captain Marvel.
I saw it literally the evening before South by Southwest started, so I saw that movie, went to sleep, woke up, went to South by Southwest, so I never had a chance to talk about it. But I think it's very good. I think it's shaggy, even by Marvel standards. It's because I think they sometimes make shaggy movies I love, nonetheless. But there's just some weirdness here. There's stuff I feel like has been chopped out. The action's only okay. But when it shines, and it shines a lot, and it works in areas that matter. I think that the Brie Larson Sam Jackson dynamic is great. I love Goose the Cat. I loved Carol Danvers' relationship with the Rambeau family. Ben Mendelsohn rocks. And like I said, the stuff they're hiding in the trailers, I won't go into too many specifics about, is what really won me over. And I love how Marvel, even at its best, tells superhero stories that it managed to sneak relevant things into. And I feel like people who say that Marvel is just popcorn entertainment sometimes are, missing some very, very clever ways that Marvel filmmakers are infusing personal touches, whether it's personal to them or personal to the times you live in, into these films. And I think that Captain Marvel does that in several ways that I think I found really powerful. And I'm going to do a minor spoiler alert here. So for 30 seconds, hit pause, take your earbuds off. I just want to say, talking to my wife, she was very, very happy to see a female-driven superhero movie where it's ultimately about a bad guy telling the woman, "You're too emotional in your work. It's gonna make you do a bad job." And then she wins the day by using her emotions effectively, because fuck men. So end of spoilers. I that was a very, very satisfying conversation, and I'm glad that there's a movie where that's the message.
Very cool. Okay, let's move on to Free Solo. Yeah. Brad, you also saw that?
I did. Free Solo is on Hulu now, and I finally got around to checking it out. And holy crap, this movie gave me so much anxiety. It is so tense just watching Alex Honnold climb this mountain. I don't even know how anybody comes to want to climb a mountain like this and not do it without a harness. It looks insane enough with a harness and with ropes and with people with you, to hold you up if you fall. And it's just insane seeing how big it is, and like especially after I looked it up how big this mountain is compared to like skyscrapers. It's nuts that he was able to do this and even wanted to do this. And there's moments in here too that aren't even from this climb that kind of like gave me stress too. Footage of other climbers who were doing these free solo, climbs up mountains there, and there's even one part in this documentary where they're showing footage of other free solo climbers that have gone a little bit awry, and there's a shot where a person falls off of the mountain that they're doing, and I thought, oh my god, that person is about to die, and then like at the very bottom right before, like a parachute goes off and like that person's saved. But it's like it's just insane to me. I was so like energized, but in like the most anxious way possible while watching this movie.
No, I also really dug Free Solo. I think I talked about that a few weeks back or probably a month back on the water cooler. What else have you been watching?
I watched Mona Lisa Smile for the first time ever. I hadn't seen it, and my girlfriend really enjoys that movie, so it was on Netflix, so we watched it together in our usual long distance way. And I enjoyed it. It's very much a female centric version of like Dead Poets Society, but it has a lot of charm to it. It has a great cast too. I had no idea some of the other people who were in this movie besides like Julia Roberts and Julia Stiles and Kirsten Dunst, but Jennifer Goodwin is in it. Kristen Ritter has like a background role in it as one of the students who doesn't really have a key role in the movie. And yeah, it was it's not something that I fell in love with, but I think that it was a very well done movie. And I think this movie actually also kind of worked as an entryway for Mike Newell to show how good he would be with the Harry Potter movies, because there is a bit like kind of a Hogwarts-esque style to the classic Wellesley University vibe.
Yeah, and it seems I was gonna say like my girlfriend. It seems like you watched you were watching the first season of Queer Eye.
I did. I haven't watched I haven't watched any of it, and I kept hearing how good it was, and I kind of wanted to, but never sat down to actually do it. And my girlfriend really likes the show, and she said you should sit down and watch this. She's like, I'll rewatch the older episodes with you, and then you can check it out. And I was so surprised. Like, I thought the show would be good and it would be fun, but this show is just an absolute delight. It's so uplifting, and I love this group of the Fab Five, especially Jonathan. Oh my gosh, Jonathan is fantastic. I love him because not only is he just so excited about everything and always full of energy and enthusiasm, but he's constantly making movie references and things like that. He's just fantastic. I want him to come to like my birthday party. But I love the stories here, because it's not only is it cool to see the renovations that they do and the makeovers and stuff like that, but there's actually real connections between these guys and the people that they are doing makeovers with, especially the kind of connections that you wouldn't normally expect, I think, to see on a show like this. A lot of things that are kind of dealing with the tension that exists between, different races and people with different political viewpoints. It's just, I've been surprised by how moving the show is and how much it pulls on your heartstrings.
See, I've only seen a couple episodes of Queer Eye, but I feel like that's what I wanted, tidying up with Marie Kondo to be more I feel like it's not always the same answer. It's more emotional. It's more about getting to the root of these people, and it's more complicated. I feel like the answers of how to fix these things, if that makes sense.
Because a lot of the stuff they dive into, it's more about it's more human. They dig into like the more personal side of things, as opposed to like the practical of just fixing up your house and organizing things. There's something about it that taps into what's like in people's hearts and in their minds, and like things that have affected them from their past and their relationships with their friends and family.
Yeah, and it still has the makeover aspect as well, though. So Ben, what have you been watching?
I watched From Here to Eternity for the first time. This is a 1953 movie about, it sort of takes place in the lead up to the attack on Pearl Harbor. And this film won 8 Academy Awards. It was directed by Fred Zinnemann, and it stars Burt Lancaster, Montgomery Clift, Deborah Kerr, Frank Sinatra, and Donna Reed. Donna Reed, I'd only seen, I think she won Best Supporting Actress that year, and I'd only seen her as the wife in It's a Wonderful Life before. And Frank Sinatra, this movie sort of like kickstarted his acting career because he won Best Supporting Actor that year as well. I knew only of this movie from the iconic shot of From Here to Eternity, which is I think it's Burt Lancaster and Deborah Kerr's characters kissing on the beach. You guys have probably seen that shot in montages the world over. But so knowing that this movie was about that and included that shot, I just assumed that the entire thing would be this sort of like sweeping romance that takes place leading up to Pearl Harbor. But it's actually only really the back half of the movie that really gets into the romantic stuff. The first half of the film, surprisingly, because this came out in the early 50s, is much more of like a Cool Hand Luke kind of thing, where Montgomery Clift's character is basically just being broken down by the army unit that he's in. And it's more about like this... I always picture, based on pop culture, I always picture like the early 50s to be this sort of... like Leave It to Beaver, like super, like cheesy, gee golly whiz kind of period in American history. But this movie sort of it depicts the way that the army worked and the way that these characters interact as being a lot more like anti-authoritarian and stuff that I didn't really place in my mind as becoming like pop culture staples until like the 1960s. So I was surprised to see something from 53 have a really, really heavy streak of that in the first half of this movie. So it's pretty good. The ending, I wasn't really a big fan of, but I would say the performances are really great across the board, and this is definitely worth watching if you have any interest in film history and all of that kind of stuff. I think you can stream this right now on like Amazon Prime. You can rent it on Vudu and YouTube and all that stuff, and that's From Here to Eternity. I also saw High Society, which is a 1956 movie directed by Charles Walters. This one also starred Frank Sinatra, and it stars Bing Crosby and Grace Kelly as well. This is a musical remake of The Philadelphia Story, which I talked about, I don't know, a month or two ago on the podcast. I watched that for the first time. That is a really famous play that was then turned into a movie with Cary Grant and Jimmy Stewart and Katharine Hepburn, and this is just a musical version of that. It's really like it's almost the same exact story, but just with a couple musical numbers thrown in. So I don't have much to say about it other than it's like the worst version of this story. If you had to watch one of the two, I would definitely recommend The Philadelphia Story over High Society. But that being said, there are some really fun moments in here. Bing Crosby and Frank Sinatra in particular have a couple of really great song and dance numbers. Well, not so much dancing really, but just singing, and the whole vibe is, a bunch of super rich people hanging out, and it's like a wealth porn almost from the 1950s. So if that strikes your fancy at all, you can rent High Society from any of those same places that I just mentioned. I also saw two movies with the word triple in the title. First up was Triple Threat, which was a movie that I saw a little while ago, but the embargo just lifted today. I'm so disappointed in this film, guys. I called it the Avengers of martial arts movies in a trailer write-up that I did for it because I was so excited about what this movie could represent. So it stars Tony Jaa, Iko Uwais, and Tiger Chen. And if you have been paying attention to the martial arts movie scene over the past 10 or 15 years, those names are huge names in that world. It also stars Scott Adkins, who's another really big name there, and Michael J. White. And I was very, very excited about this movie. It's got a super stripped down basic plot where a Chinese billionaire's daughter becomes the target of an elite assassin squad, and a couple of renegade mercenaries try to protect her and stop these assassins. And it teams up all these incredible people from the world of martial arts movies, and the whole thing is just so limp and dramatically inert and just such a bore and a slog to get through. I was with all of those people in there, Tony Jaa, if you guys have seen the movies like The Protector and Ong Bak, those are incredible films that put his martial arts prowess at front and center. And I was hoping to really see all of these people be let loose and clash in really interesting ways. And it was like there's not that many fight scenes in this movie, and that's what the entire film should be, is just a loose excuse to get from one fight scene to another. Nobody's coming to this for detailed plot stuff, and the movie sort of gets into the weeds on that a little bit, and it's just not fun. I'm so sad and disappointed about this. I know that we've talked about this a little bit between you and I, Jacob, but did you ever have a chance to see this movie, or has anybody else on the podcast seen this yet?
I haven't seen it, but I have a question.
Yes.
As somebody who consumes my fair share of direct-to-video action trash, I'm familiar with the kind of movie you're describing, where the case often is they can afford to bring on these martial arts stars or the big name in the cast for 3, 4, 5, 6 days, and then they have to pad out the rest of the movie with tons of plot because they have to squeeze in the action scenes with the stars. I mean, it's something you actually see a lot in recent Steven Seagal movies, where even though he's the star, he's sometimes the third most important character because he shows up for 5 days and screws off while barely doing his own stunts. So does it feel like maybe the actors who are really cool are barely in it, and they're sort of padding it out with this plot because maybe they simply couldn't afford to have them all in one place? Is that possible?
I would feel much more sorry for this film if that were the case, but sadly it is not. All of the main people in this film are in the entire movie. It's all of them, and they're just so there's a final confrontation between Michael J. White and Iko Uwais and Tiger Chen like teamed up against him like a 2-on-1 that could have been legendary. It could have been talked about in the same, you know, sort of hushed tones that martial arts fanatics talk about the Raid movies. And it's just such a bummer. Like, there's one decent fight where it's like a 2-on-1 with Iko Uwais and Tony Jaa versus Scott Adkins at the very end, but it's not worth waiting through the entire movie for. And also, the one other note that I had written down was this movie really is a true fantasy because it's about a mega rich heiress who spends her entire family's fortune on helping the poor. So, yeah, it's got that going for it, but that's about it. So that's Triple Threat. It's actually playing in theaters tonight for one night only, like 150 theaters, like a limited release around the country. I would not recommend going to see it in theaters. I would not recommend watching it in any case. But if you refuse my advice, you can watch it on VOD when it hits this Friday, March 22nd.
I'm curious to hear about the next film, Ben, because this is a film I was planning on watching over the weekend. I just couldn't find time. And that's Triple Frontier. How is it?
Yes. So from Triple Threat to Triple Frontier. And this one was directed by J.C. Shandor. It's on Netflix right now, and it stars Ben Affleck, Oscar Isaac, Charlie Hunnam, Garrett Hedlund, and Pedro Pascal. And it's about a bunch of former special ops guys who plan this heist in South America. And J.C. Shandor is an interesting director. He's made movies like Margin Call and All Is Lost and A Most Violent Year, and he strikes me as somebody who's very, very interested in process because this film feels very methodical. I guess it's sort of reflecting the approach of its former special ops protagonists because it's very like, all right, this is how we're going to do this. We're going to set this up, and then that exact thing happens, and it's like step by step going through. And then, of course, things don't go fully according to plan. But I think I enjoyed this movie. I just watched it this morning, so I'm still sort of sitting with it and trying to wrap my mind around whether or not I enjoyed it. I think there's some really interesting stuff here about the cycles of violence that occur in terrible situations like this, and the generational trauma that is inflicted in terms of like the consequences of greed and the consequences of these guys' actions. But the film just sort of like flirts with those ideas and doesn't really fully dive into them. But there's some beautiful cinematography in here, and the action is pretty decent. And I was pretty tense, like seeing how this whole thing was going to play out. And it goes to some pretty unexpected places, or I found them to be unexpected based on the way that the whole film sort of was setting itself up. So I would give it a loose recommend. Maybe, yeah, it's tough. It's not going to be like in the top 5 Netflix movies, but it's a solid watch. And I would say that the performances are pretty good, and yeah, like I said, the cinematography. I mean, maybe that alone makes it worth watching because it's just there's some really, really gorgeous footage of jungles and stuff. I think it was shot in Hawaii, but it's supposed to take place in the jungles of South America for the most part. But yeah, that's Triple Frontier. It's on Netflix right now.
Okay, earlier on we heard, Chris, that you went to Austin to see Pet Sematary. We're all interested to hear, what did you think?
I loved it. My review is up on slashfilm.com right now, so I encourage everyone to go read it. But this, I had very high expectations for this because Pet Sematary is my favorite Stephen King book. I like the '89 film, and I was really worried that this would just not live up to my specific brand of hype, but it really did, and then some. It's not the most faithful adaptation, but as I say in my review, I feel like the best Stephen King movies are not the ones that are 100%, accurate to the text. It's more that they're true to the spirit. And I think the best example of that is, think of The Shining. Stanley Kubrick's The Shining is considered, one of the best Stephen King movies. That is very unfaithful to the text. It's true to the spirit, it's true to the story, but it does not translate the text exactly. And case in point, Stephen King was so disappointed in that years later he wrote a miniseries adaptation, which is almost word for word from the book, and it's terrible. It's a terrible movie. So I feel like if you're one of those people who gets really hung up on exact adaptations, you might not like this, but if you're, a fan of the world of Stephen King, this film really delivers. It really captures that dread and that menace that is so prevalent in the book. And It's actually like it's somehow bleaker than the book, which I never thought would be possible because the book is incredibly dark, but the film goes to even darker places. And the fact that this is like a major studio release with these very, very dark things in it is very impressive. I'm really happy that Paramount let this film get away with what it gets away with. And I think it's going to go over well. I don't know if it's going to be as big a hit as the recent It remake was, but based on, the audience at South by Southwest I saw it with, I think people are going to love this because even though it is incredibly bleak, there's these weirdly funny moments in it just because it gets like absurd to the point of how dark it is that you can't help but just nervously laugh at what's going on. But it's definitely one of my all-time favorite Stephen King adaptations, and that says a lot for me because I'm a huge Stephen King nerd, so it really did live up to the hype.
Very cool. It seems like both you and Jacob really love this film. I've been seeing a little bit of mixed reaction around the web. Why do you think that not everybody's responding to it as well as the same as you and Jacob?
I don't know. It's weird. It's got great reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, but after the film let out, I was talking to a few people I knew and some people I didn't really know. And for the most part, not everyone, but a large amount of people loved it. But there were one or two people who were just like, oh, I didn't like that. And their sticking point really seems to be that it doesn't stay true to the text. And honestly, if you're going to let that bother you so much, I don't know what you you really want from a movie. Like, if you want the text, read the book. That's what the book is for. You're not going to get, no movie is ever going to be exactly like the book. And if that's like such a huge sticking point for you, you're always going to be disappointed. Unless you're watching, Zack Snyder direct 300 or Watchmen. I don't know what else you could want. And at the same time, though, I don't want to like shrug people off. It's not going to be for everyone. If you don't like it, you don't like it. That's fine. But for me, this really did work.
And that's not the only horror film you saw.
Right. I got to South by Southwest a day before the Pet Sematary screening, and Jacob was able to help me get into the Curse of La Llorona screening, which is the latest Conjuring movie, because that also played at South by Southwest. And boy, was this movie not good. I'm a Conjuring universe fan. I think I like the main Conjuring movies more, Conjuring 2, than the spin-offs. But of all the spin-offs, this is definitely just the worst. It offers nothing new. It's just constant jump scares. And I really did not care for it. And like the minute it ended, I basically ran out of the theater just to get the hell out of there because I was so bored with it. Other than that, I mentioned I went to the Drafthouse twice. The two films I saw were Climax, which is the Gaspar Noé movie, which I think Jacob talked about previously, and this movie is as insane as people have been saying it is. It's just, it starts off kind of, I won't say normal, but it starts off like a not insane story, and then it slowly goes out of its mind. And I'm not really a big Gaspar Noé fan, but this I think is probably his best movie. And then the other one was Apollo 11, which is a documentary that's made up entirely of recently discovered footage of the Apollo 11 mission, and it's been remastered, and it's in it's in 4K, and I think it was shot in 70 millimeter, and it looks gorgeous. Like, if it almost looks like it was shot like yesterday, and there's no narration, there's no talking heads. It's not like a normal documentary that you were so used to. It's literally just, it's constructed like you're watching a narrative unfold surrounding the mission. And it's very exciting. It's very engrossing. It's like it puts you like there in the moment.
Hey, Chris, I have a question about this one. Have you seen For All Mankind?
I have not, no.
It's another documentary. Actually, Criterion has a Blu-ray of it, and it's similar in structure, where it's just a narration-free assembly of NASA footage of various space missions. But unlike this, it's 5 or 6 different missions, footage from those cut together in tandem, exploring a space mission from very beginning until return to Earth. And I was just curious if you could offer a comparison, but I guess not, because I'm very curious to see how they differ.
I mean, based on what you said, that is really what this is like. But I'm having not seen For All Mankind, I can't comment on the quality of the footage. But I think the drawing factor here is how crisp and how HD the footage here looks. Like, you would never believe this was shot decades ago. It looks like it was shot like today. Like, so that I think is the real drawing factor here.
Yeah, I highly recommend that documentary that Jacob just mentioned. It's I guess it's on Criterion, so I guess you're going to get it when you get that service. That's coming.
Yeah,
out, right?
I'll have to finally check it out.
And you finally got to see Aquaman.
I did, and man, I really liked Aquaman. I was not.
Wow.
Yes.
I was surprised at how much I liked it. It's really stupid. It has a really stupid screenplay, but I love how much this movie is swinging for the fences. I would rather watch this than ever rewatch what was it called, Infinity War, because it's trying something different. It's trying to be this big epic. Like, nothing in Infinity War feels epic to me. It just feels like another movie. And Aquaman, it's trying to be this like Lord of the Rings meets H.P. Lovecraft movie. And like I said, not all of it works. The chemistry between Jason Momoa and Amber Heard is non-existent. Like, they have no chemistry at all. The script is too cluttered. Like, even though I thought Black Manta as a character was cool, he doesn't really fit with the rest of the movie. It just feels like they put him in the movie because he's a well-known character. But visually, it's stunning. The colors are gorgeous. I love that nothing really looks real in the movie, but it's like intentional. It's not like trying to look real. It's this like hyper realism. So yeah, I really liked Aquaman. It's not like my favorite superhero movie, but it's so much more interesting than a lot of stuff Marvel has been doing lately. So you win this round, DC, at least in my mind.
I like you gave us a big hug with one arm and then slapped us with your Infinity War comments, Chris.
Look, I'm here for.
Does Infinity War have a dragon though?
Yeah, no,
I don't think so.
Not. Yeah, there's no giant Cthulhu monster that comes out of the sea in Infinity War. So
yeah, Infinity War doesn't also have a slow motion beach walk scene sent to a shitty cover of Africa by Pitbull.
Hilarious.
Yes.
I will say, but there is no moment in Infinity War as visually inspired as Aquaman and Mira's dive into the trench. So I'll give it that.
Yeah, this movie it looks gorgeous. It's just a gorgeous looking movie.
By visually inspired, you mean by Tron Legacy and Avatar, right?
I think this looks better than those movies. I don't know. Whatever. Listen, Infinity War sucks. That's all I'm saying. It's a bad movie. Moving on. I just watched Dragged Across Concrete, which is the latest Craig Zoller movie. People love this guy. He wrote Bone Tomahawk. He wrote Brawl in Cell Block 99. He wrote that new Puppet Master movie. He's got a very big following among genre fans, and I am not one of them. I actually don't like any of those movies. I think they're just either okay to terrible. I think the Puppet Master movie is almost unwatchable, honestly. But this worked for me. It's definitely not going to be for everyone. It's unrelentingly brutal, and then there's the fact that it stars Mel Gibson, who is a terrible person, and people may not want to watch him in anything, especially in this movie where he plays like a really racist cop, which just seems like a bit of troll casting, because everyone knows Mel Gibson is racist, so here he is playing a racist. But if you can get past all that stuff, this is a surprisingly good movie. It's hard to watch. It's shocking, and it's deliberately trying to push buttons, but it worked for me in the most part.
Here's my question about this one. I'm sorry to butt in, Chris, but
no,
I think Brawl on Cell Block 99 is one of my favorite movies I hated because I think it's a loathsome piece of shit, but made with such vigor, determination, and such a specific skill set. It is so uniquely S. Craig Zoller. Nobody else could have made that. Nobody else could have made it in that style, with that pace, with that tone. And it is also an aggressive piece of trash that I want to burn. But I also want to talk about it constantly. Is Dragged Across Concrete as interesting as that?
I think it is. It's not as stylish as that movie. I think there's like a heightened realism in Brawl that makes it seem like it's set in this like alternate universe, because like the beginning of the movie, Vince Vaughn beats a car up until it falls apart, which no one can really do. But this movie feels a little more grounded in the real world, so it doesn't have those stylish flourishes, but it has a very similar loathsome tone that just worked better for me here than in other films.
Okay, cool. So what else have you been watching, Chris?
Last but not least, I watched 4 episodes of the brand new Twilight Zone, and I'm embargoed from giving a full review. But let's just say, if you're a fan of the Twilight Zone, you won't be disappointed. The very first time they do the thing where they introduce something and then the camera slowly pans over to reveal Jordan Peele in a suit as the narrator, I got like goosebumps. I was just like, oh yes, this is exactly what I wanted, because he's doing, the Rod Serling part where he just shows up in the middle of scenes to introduce the episode. And I'll have a review soon when the embargo is up, but that'll be on CBS All Access, I think, next month. But if you're looking forward to it, I don't think you'll be disappointed.
The one thing I got to ask you, Chris, is with CBS producing this, CBS has like this network feel to it. I feel like even the Star Trek show, Star Trek Discovery, doesn't feel like on the level of like a premium cable network production. Where does this land?
This looks great. I mean, I have not watched Star Trek, so I can't comment on how that show looks, but this looked really cinematic. I was impressed with the visual style of the show. Granted, I've only seen 4 episodes. I don't know how many they're going to be total, so there might be cheaper looking episodes. Maybe they intentionally released the best episodes to press first, but based on what I saw, it looks good.
Okay, Jacob, you've been spending most of your time at South by. We talked about that yesterday on the podcast.
Yeah, we spent an hour talking about my favorite films of the fest, so please go listen to yesterday's episode for my full thoughts on a lot of these movies. So I'm just going to give each of these movies a one-sentence review for those of you who don't want to hear me talk at length. Jordan Peele's Us, maybe my favorite film of the year. Hard to see. Booksmart. Olivia Wilde makes my favorite coming-of-age movie in a long time. The Art of Self-Defense. Fight Club 2019, but much funnier. Good Boys. I laughed until I literally hurt all over my body. Pet Sematary. Chris is right. Stuber. Kumail Nanjiani and Dave Bautista are an amazing buddy cop duo. The Curse of La Llorona, absolute trash. I'll be writing an editorial about how this movie betrays the Conjuring universe closer to release. All right, moving on. Post South by, I started watching Netflix's Bodyguard, a BBC series that Netflix acquired after it was a huge, massive hit, like record-shattering from what I understand in the UK. And this series stars Game of Thrones' Richard Madden. He may know as Rob, the ill-fated Robb Stark, plays David Budd, a police officer who works as a bodyguard for politicians and security services, and he has PTSD, and he's come back from military service damaged, but with a perspective that lets him not only protect and serve, but also kill, but also talk his way out of things when he needs to. And what I was most taken by with the show in its first 3 episodes, out of the 6 in the first season, is how much it plays like the anti-24. And I say as somebody who used to watch 24 all the time back in the day, but 24 was so irresponsible with its politics and so unwilling to, try to even explore anything beyond a vengeful, violent approach to counterterrorism. Whereas the first sequence in the first episode of Bodyguard is Richard Madden's character diffusing a terrorist situation through pure negotiation without a gun by talking a suicide bomber down and having her peacefully surrender to the authorities. And the show, even though it has gunfights and gets violent, really leans on David Budd being a character who was wrapped up in all the post 9/11 warmongering, a guy who was sent overseas, a guy who was injured, a guy who saw his friends die, and has come back with extremely complex feelings on war. And he knows war better than anybody else, but he knows well enough to know, hey, maybe we shouldn't do this constantly. We should find other solutions. At the same time, he's trying to, stop a terror plot. At the same time, he's forced to use his violent skills. I was really won over by Madden's performance. I think he's incredibly, he's an incredibly good-looking, movie star type guy, but he's also doing some really good subtle work here, where you always see the gears turning even when his face is blank. You're always wondering what he's thinking and how he's planning to approach the situation. And maybe the show craps a bit in the last half. I'm looking forward to finishing it sometime this week. Did anybody else watch Bodyguard?
I have not, but I've heard a lot of comparisons to 24 and some comparisons to Homeland. And Homeland I always think of as kind of trying to be a smarter man's 24. So I'm wondering how that compares to that.
I've only seen the first 2 seasons of Homeland, and I guess Homeland is a show I like. I think it gets a little bit too soapy for my taste, and Bodyguard does lean on some, occasionally overly dramatic plot points. But I feel like it has the intensity of 24 and the sophistication of Homeland, but with a perspective that feels like it only could have been made now. I feel like it has enough distance from the start of the War on Terror to very clearly and level-headedly approach this type of storytelling more so than those shows.
And isn't this supposed to be like sexy? Like Homeland isn't sexy, but this show isn't it supposed to be like him and the bodyguard and his client are getting it on all the time? Isn't that what the show is about? Yeah.
One subplot is that the David Budd and the woman he's protecting have a good dynamic because not only do they sort of fall for each other, but he hates her politics. Like he's protecting her because he is assigned to, but she's a warmonger who deeply believes in everything that he stands against. So it ends up being like this sort of really, really bizarre chemistry where you end up liking them both and seeing how they can make that connection while at the same time constantly having to concern himself with the fact that this woman who he's being assigned to put his life on the line for, he would have her removed from office if he had the choice.
Okay, I think you finally sold me on this show, Jacob. I'm going to give it a try.
It's good. If the first episode doesn't win you over, that's fine. But the first episode really, really grabbed me. So I'd say at least try that. Oh, and I watched the Top Chef season finale. I won't spoil it here, but I will say that the right person won because the other person, my wife and I decided early on in the season, was the worst Top Chef contestant we've seen in years. Could not stand this person. We were rooting for this person to be eliminated constantly, and it never happened, and they made it to the finale, but they did not win, and I will celebrate their loss. Thank you very much.
Cool. Okay, let's move on to HT. What have you been watching this week?
In addition to Shazam, I got to see Wonder Park. Well, maybe not got to see isn't the right word because it's fine. It's a Nickelodeon animated film that feels very much like a overlong TV pilot for a TV series, and that's because it is. It's intended to sort of kick off a television series that will be coming to Nickelodeon later this year, much in the vein of Jimmy Neutron and I think one other show that got a start in a film from Nickelodeon. Wonder Park is really beautifully animated, and it has sort of some Pixar-light emotional complexity going towards it, but it just kind of feels a little half-baked and doesn't quite live up to the park is gorgeous, but it's the most interesting part of the film. So I wrote a review of it on slashfilm.com. I don't really have much more to say of it, but you can check out my review on the website. I also saw The Guilty, which is a Danish film, I think, on Hulu. And this is a thriller that takes place kind of in one room. It's a very claustrophobic thriller that follows an alarm dispatcher for the police station who gets an emergency call from a kidnapped woman and tries to start a search for this woman and her kidnapper from the confines of his sort of alarm dispatch desk. And this is a really great, really taut thriller despite its sort of low-stakes setting. It's incredible that it basically is just one performance on screen. The star, Jacob Cedergren, is the only person who really appears on screen apart from a few background actors and a few people who have a few lines on screen. But otherwise, it's him and people on the phone. And he carries this film amazingly. It's actually set for an American remake starring Jake Gyllenhaal, which sounds very much like a Jake Gyllenhaal kind of movie. But it's great. I recommend that you check it out on Hulu. It's quite a surprise. It's a very short film, but it's compelling and gripping for the entire, I think, hour and a half that it runs. And next film I saw is a film called Deep Red, and this is a Dario Argento film that just came onto Amazon Prime. Amazon Prime just kind of dropped a bunch of Italian giallo films and spaghetti westerns. So there's a interesting sort of trove of films that range from really great to really interesting. And Deep Red is more on the better side. It's a film that Dario Argento directed for Suspiria. So I went into this kind of expecting something more along the lines of Suspiria, a little trippy, a little surreal. And this was actually more of a slasher whodunit than I anticipated, although it has some sort of strange kind of unnerving elements like this presence of a doll that keeps appearing at all of these crime scenes. But it follows a pianist, a British jazz musician, who kind of becomes obsessed with this serial killer after witnessing the murder of a psychic medium. And he starts to follow the trail of this serial killer, and people around him start dying, all yada yada. And it's a visually stunning film, as you'd expect from a Dario Argento film, and it's quite enjoyable. I recommend it. This is on Amazon Prime, and it comes with a bunch of other Italian giallo films that are like available on that service now. I remember when we were talking about a while ago whether we would prefer Amazon or Netflix, because of just like the wealth of movies that Amazon has, but they don't quite have the high Rotten Tomatoes scores that Netflix films have. It's movies like Deep Red and the other more obscure films like that I think give Amazon the slight leg up, because you don't really find a lot of films before the 1980s on Netflix. So Deep Red, you can find that on Amazon Prime. And speaking of Netflix, after I just kind of criticized it a bit, I watched the new episodes of Terrace House that were just made available on the streaming service. I've talked a little bit about Terrace House before. I won't go too far into it, but this is the last batch of episodes that are taking place at the Karuizawa season. Karuizawa is a sort of sleepy rural town a couple hours outside of Tokyo, and I've been really enjoying this season, which is called Terrace House Opening New Doors. And I've liked it for that rural setting and how kind of sleepy and peaceful it's been, and has like a sort of more family-oriented bent. It has not been so for this new batch of episodes. It's very dramatic and kind of stressful, but with one housemate in particular emerging as probably one of the worst housemates in a Terrace House sort of echelon. But I've been enjoying it a lot, and it's still kind of much more serene than any other American reality shows that you'll see. So Terrace House, now streaming on Netflix.
Very cool. And I just want to say we've reached the point that this is already the longest episode of the water cooler in the history of the water cooler. We still have 2 more segments. We're going to try to barrel through them because I know, we're running really long, but we haven't recorded, one of these episodes in 2 weeks. So,
and people definitely don't have a choice as to whether or not they want to keep listening.
Yeah, that too. Okay. Let's move on to what we've been eating. I discovered something this week. I discovered this thing called Pizza in a Bag. It's produced by Super Snack Time, which I guess is a company that's owned by Epic Mealtime, that YouTube series. And they basically have made out of pepperoni. They made pepperoni jerky. It's called Pizza in a Bag, and the one I would recommend you check out is the Supreme Pizza version. Actually, Brad, I would actually recommend this to you, because this is not just a keto treat. Like, this is this is a treat for anybody. But it just so happens that it's low on carbs, high in fat, and each piece of the pepperoni literally tastes like you're eating pizza. Like, it smells and tastes like it is so good. I would highly recommend it to anyone. It's called Pizza in a Bag. I think you can get it on their website for really cheap. Amazon, sells it for like an outrageously upcharged price. And I think Walmart has it. So if you have a Walmart near you, check out Pizza in a Bag.
So it's like jerky?
Yeah, it's like these big slices of pepperoni. They have like this stuff sprinkled onto it, and it has, I don't know how they make it, and I actually don't even know it's like very healthy for you, because like if you look at the list of ingredients, it has like more ingredients than anything I've ever seen. But yeah, it's strangely good. And although if you go to Walmart to try to find it, one of my friends went to Walmart to try to find it, and I guess it was like in the fishing section or something. So you might have to ask for where it is. But I would highly recommend it. Over the weekend, I found a recipe for keto McGriddles. So I made a keto version of the McDonald's, that sandwich. There's basically an egg and bacon and cheese sandwich inside like, 2 pancake slices. And it's very good. I will link that recipe in the show notes. So if you want to try it out and you want to, eat a, more healthy version of a McDonald's McGriddle, there you go. And it's low in carbs and sugar. I also got a shipment of the Cereal School. This is a cereal that's made for low carb people. I had gotten it previously. They make 2 different kinds. They make a fruity kind, which is kind of like, I guess, like Fruit Loops or Fruity Pebbles or whatever. And they make a cinnamon bun kind, which is kind of like, I guess, Cinnamon Toast Crunch or whatever. I loved it. They recently reformulated it. It was 5 net carbs per serving. They changed the sweeteners. They changed how it looks. It's now like this puff, kind of like a Fruity Pebble. No, what are the puffs, Brad? Like
the Fruity Puff?
Like a circular
Fruit Loops?
Tricks? Fruit
Oh,
Loops?
Tricks. Yeah. Tricks has I think now they went back to having the fruit shapes, but yeah, for a while they were just the fruity puffs, yeah.
Yeah. So they went to that. I will admit I do not like this as much. When you put it in milk, the flavor kind of goes away. I still like it, but I don't love it as much. I know, Jacob, I recommended this to you. And with South by, did you get a chance to try this?
Yeah. Having not tried the first formula, I think that this is a perfectly acceptable, tasty snack, especially when you're on the go, especially when you need something to crunch when you're waiting.
I actually recommend it better as an on-go snack without milk than with milk, because I feel like the milk takes away the flavor, but like if you eat it out of the bag and it's like 100 calories or something.
Yeah, it's like 100 calories. I have a bag right in front of me. I've been on mute this entire. Whenever I'm not talking on the show, I've been eating a bag of it this entire show. But yeah, it's 1 carb for a bag, 16 protein, and it's one of those things where like if you poured into a bowl of milk, you'd probably be really disappointed by it. But if you're, on a diet and you want, a satisfying crunch, if you want a burst of fruity or cinnamon flavor, it really does scratch that itch, and it actually is very filling because of all the protein in it. So having not tasted the previous flavor, I am very much on board with the Cereal School and buying more. I bought the $50 box, Peter, so I have a whole bunch of it. So I'm glad I liked it. My one complaint is that if you eat too much of it at once, it does start to just taste like you're chewing styrofoam a little bit. So you solve that by, having a couple pieces at a time, putting it aside, not just eating gaping handfuls of it. I think it's a snack that's meant to be enjoyed, at a certain pace. But I'm impressed enough in knowing that there's no other product like this for people like us who eat the way we do, Peter. Yeah. I think they have me as a customer for at least a little while longer. Yeah.
No, I like this company, and I'm sure they're going to be playing with the formula a little bit more too. I ended up getting Keto Mojo, and what this is a blood reader device. So I can take blood out of my finger and test it and see what my blood glucose reading is, and also see how many ketones are in my blood. The reason why I got this is I used to track. If I was in keto, they have these like strips that you pee onto, but as you get more into what is it? Fat adapted, I guess. Yeah, that does not work as well. And I had hit a slump in my weight loss, for like, 2 2 weeks I had not lost any weight, so it was bothering me. I was like wondering, like, is there stuff I'm eating that's, you know, taking me out of ketosis, or stuff that's like spiking my blood sugar? So I bought this, and that's a big thing for me because I am deathly afraid of needles. If there's a needle on screen during a movie, I will close my eyes. Like, I do not like going to the doctor, and by not like, I will scream like a girl when my blood's getting taken out. But I wanted to get this because I wanted to get to the bottom of the story, and I'm glad I did, because I was able to pinpoint some stuff I was eating that was affecting me that I did not know was affecting me. And it's my only complaint about this reader, Keto Mojo, is it's not that user friendly. It still like feels like a device that you'd get from, like, you know, some hospital supply company or something like that, and you kind of have to like do your research and like, what does this number even mean? And then you got to do some math, because you need to divide the, you know, the glucose reading into the ketone reading, and that gives you your GKI, and that means something. It's way too much. It should be simplified. I'm sure they'll eventually have one that's more simplified, but if you're doing this, I recommend it. Yeah. So, Jacob, what have you been eating?
In addition to cereal school, I finally got my hands on Rebel ice cream, which is now being carried in H-E-B stores in Texas. And for those who don't know, H-E-B is the major grocery chain in most cities in Texas. And so now I have regular access to it, and this may be my favorite diet snack of all time. This ice cream is legitimately good. I like the peanut butter chocolate flavor and the cookie dough flavor personally, but there's all different kinds, and it's specifically made for, you know, keto diets and or the people with diabetes, people who trying to avoid sugar. It's high fat, made with cream, but no real sugar in it. So I think you can eat an entire pint for 5 carbs, up to 8 carbs. So if you're like me, maybe you spend your entire day being really, really good in your diet and only eating very few carbs, and you go home and say, oh, you know what? I'm going to have an entire pint of ice cream for dessert, and you can get away with it guilt-free. And it's one of those things where, like, it sounds, you know, crazy, like quackery, like, how does this work? But in the time since we last recorded a water cooler, I've been eating this ice cream pretty regularly as my, you know, go-to snack in an evening. And I'm down another gold shirt, and I'm down another hole in my belt. So, you know, I'm just going to keep on doing what works, which means following the rules I've been following and taking Peter's recommendations for snacks, because they've almost always worked out.
Yeah, no, and I actually hit 45 pounds lost, so I'm also doing well. Great to see. Oh, thank you. It's great to hear from readers and listeners out there. We've been hearing a bunch of this has inspired some people. I actually, even a colleague of ours came up to me at a junket, and he had lost 30 pounds, and it was you know, thanks to him hearing about all this. So I'm glad that people are getting something out of this, and it's I'm sure these recommendations are annoying. You know, some people that are, you know, like Brad, who just want to eat the newest sugary cereal. But I'm glad we're helping someone out there.
I'm not annoyed by it. If anything, I'll have all these ideas in my back pocket when I decide to stop being a piece of shit.
But Brad, I will recommend the pizza in a bag. I want to hear your thoughts on the supreme pizza in a bag.
I'll have to see if I can find it, because I do like getting beef jerky every now and then, and I love pepperoni, so I'll have to give it a shot.
Yeah. So what kind of sugary cereal have you been eating this week, Brad?
So I do have 2 new cereals this week that just recently came out. They were actually released on National Cereal Day back in early March, on March 7th, I think it was. Post-release, 2 new cereals that are very odd flavors to turn into cereals, and they were so odd that I had to try them. So they came out with these new this maple bacon donut cereal and chicken and waffle cereal, and they're from, like, the, I guess you could say, the Honey Bunches of Oats family of cereals that Post has, because they use the same flakes from Honey Bunches of Oats. And they're like their logos on the box and everything, but then they combine those flakes with these new pieces that make for the weird flavors. So the maple bacon donut one is surprisingly not bad, but it's also very odd. It has a little bit of the Honey Bunches of Oats flakes in it, but then the more prominent and plentiful pieces are these like brown loops that represent the maple bacon donuts. And there's definitely a sweet smell to it. It's almost along the lines of like the artificial like pancake or waffle smell, a very syrupy maple kind of scent. And there's a hint of the bacon in there too. And when you taste it dry, it's an interesting mix of salty and sweet. Kind of in the same way that like when you have like a chocolate caramel with like sea salt on it, it has a decent mix of the salty and sweet. And the bacon flavor is definitely a little more prominent than I would have liked, I think, because it's better dry, I think, than it is in milk. It's a little odd in milk, but it's not necessarily bad either. It's different. And I'm not used to having that kind of like salty flavor with cereal. So it's a little bit odd, but not necessarily terrible. I didn't hate it. And it's kind of the same thing with the chicken and waffle cereal, except with the chicken and waffle cereal, the chicken flavor is a lot less prominent, especially when it's in the milk. But if you have this one actually has two different pieces in it. It has little square waffle pieces that basically are like waffle crisp reincarnated. If you could separate all of the waffle pieces from this cereal, you'd basically have waffle crisp back. And then they have these little like chicken drumstick pieces, and if you eat those by themselves, they actually kind of taste like a snack that you would get in a bag. You can kind of like taste the fried chicken seasoning as if it were separated and put into little crunchy like edible pieces. And combined, again, it's another weird thing where the salt and the salty and sweet doesn't necessarily work well with the milk, but I do think the chicken and waffle works better as a combined flavor. And I think maybe that might just be because, I don't know, the chicken and waffle like flavor together when you get at a restaurant or something kind of works. But it might just be because the maple flavor is more prominent and it just tastes a lot more like waffle crisp with a little bit of saltiness in it. So again, not a new favorite by any means, but just, weird enough and different enough for me to want to try them.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Well, what else have you been eating this week?
So I went to Canada, and Canada is kind of like diet Europe when it comes to having different kinds of candy bars and snacks. I went out of my way to hit up a grocery store to see what kind of different candies they had up there, and I was not disappointed. One of the things I love about other countries when it comes to the different candy bars they have is specifically the different flavors of Kit Kats that exist literally everywhere else except the United States. I don't understand why the U.S. Kit Kats are only just the regular ones. Like every now and then they bring out they have like the dark chocolate and the white chocolate, and the minis have a new flavor every now and then. And they have a mint one that comes out around Christmas. They do a red velvet one around Valentine's Day. And they have a triple chocolate one that they do around Halloween. But everywhere else, they have tons of different flavors of Kit Kats. And so I picked up some new ones in Canada. One of them is a cookie crumble one that's kind of like a Kit Kat with like an Oreo cookie crumble in the middle of it. And also a hazelnut crunch Kit Kat, which is basically like a Kit Kat that is filled with kind of like a Ferrero Rocher kind of hazelnut and crunch filling. Both are fantastic. Both made me wish that there were, again, more flavors of Kit Kats in the United States, but alas, we're stuck with the regular Kit Kats.
Hey, Brad, I can actually answer that question for you about Kit Kats and why you're not getting them in the United States. If you care for me to interrupt your snack spiel for a second.
I think isn't it because Kit Kat is owned by a different company around the rest of the world than it is in the United States?
Yeah, more or less. From understanding, if you're a listener who can correct me on this, please correct me. But I believe that the name is licensed by a separate company for international release, and it's a whole separate company using that name by completely different craziness. And for some reason, the United States company just has no interest in taking advantage of what the other company is doing to create success worldwide.
Yeah, that's frustrating. And so since it's Easter, there was some other good Easter candy that was out. I know in recent years we've gotten Oreo eggs over here, which is something that was overseas for the longest time, and those are fantastic. The cookies and cream filling, and those are great. And then there's another one that I found in Canada that is a Chips Ahoy chocolate egg that has basically this cookie dough filling inside of it, and those are awesome. They also have Caramilk chocolate eggs up there, which is basically the Canadian version of Caramello. And I also picked up Coffee Crisp chocolate eggs, and Coffee Crisp is like a mainstay candy bar up in Canada. And as you might guess, it has a coffee flavor to it, but it has crispy like wafer pieces inside of it. And this is basically the chocolate eggs with little crunchy Coffee Crisp pieces inside that are also very good. And then I tried these just new crisp apple Pop-Tarts. That's not a Canadian-specific thing. That's just a new Pop-Tart flavor that I happened to find in grocery stores recently. And it's one of my favorite newer Pop-Tart flavors. I'm usually a traditional frosted strawberry guy. Sometimes I go with the s'mores ones. But these crisp apple Pop-Tarts are fantastic. They kind of remind me of every year on the holidays, my mom makes this apple crisp dessert dish. And the taste is basically like if you took that and put it into a Pop-Tart. They're, obviously they're Pop-Tarts, so they're not super healthy, but they're very good, and I enjoyed them.
One of the things that I've been craving lately, because it's nearing up on Easter, is the Cadbury mini eggs. Does anybody else here eat those?
Oh, I love Cadbury mini eggs.
I unfortunately there's no keto substitute for those. So
I actually bought some of those in Canada because just like with Kit Kats in Canada and around the world, the Cadbury eggs are not owned by Hershey. They're actually owned by Cadbury. And so the chocolate they use isn't Hershey chocolate, it's Cadbury chocolate. So they're infinitely better when you buy them outside the United States.
I'm jealous. I think I'm going to have to buy one of those bags, one of those small bags, just for my next cheat day whenever I get there. 5 more pounds.
They have new, it's more an aesthetic thing than a flavor thing. They have what are their Cadbury Shimmer eggs, where the egg shells are a little bit shiny.
I have seen that. That seems to be like the new thing in candy this year, is
shiny candy,
glittery candy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to what we've been playing. We've officially, I think, hit about 2 hours at this point. I went to a game day this past week at my friend Brian's, played a bunch of party games. I wanted to recommend a few things that we did play. I played this very simple card game called Illusion, where each card has kind of the 5 main colors, and it's almost like an art piece, where like an abstract art piece where the colors are making different shapes and stuff, and you kind of have to say if the next card that you pull out has more of whatever the color is that round, so say the color is green, you have to decide if the card that you're putting out has more green in it than the card that's already out. And basically, if you're the other person, you can challenge the other person. It's a fun, very easy gateway game. I think it could replace something like No Thanks. It's fun, fast, easy to explain, and almost anybody could understand it, even the youngest of kids, I think. The second game we played was a card game called The Mind. This is a cooperative game where you're all working together. And the game uses 100 cards, numbered 1 to 100, and obviously those are shuffled. And this is a mind reading game. So what needs to happen is the cards need to be played into the center of the table in ascending order from 1 to 100. So in the first round, everybody only has 1 card, right? And it has to be played into the center without any talking, any communication at all. So you kind of have to guess when it's your turn to play the card into the center. Now with 1 card, it's very easy, but each round you eventually get, additional cards. So once you're working with 4 or 5 cards, it becomes much harder to gauge if the next card is yours without any communication. It's a lot of fun. I think they sell that at Target. It's called The Mind. And the other game I wanted to recommend is a game called Decrypto. And this is a team game where you're competing against, you have 2 different teams. Each team has a set of 4 different words that they're looking at. So say one of the words is room, and number 1 is room, number 2 is exorcist, number 3 is feet, number 4 is something else, right? And your partner gets a card that says a code. Like it's like 1, 4, 3, 2, and he needs to write down on a piece of paper 4 words to get you to guess the code. But at the same time, the other team is also trying to guess your code, because they are able to write down all the words that have been given as clues throughout the game, and they're trying to make connections of like what words could be synonyms or whatever of other things. But you can do fun things like one of the words in our game was room, and my friend knew that I was a big film nerd, so for his clue for room, he used the word brie, which the other team thought it was something to do with cheese. So it's a fun game. I would highly recommend any 3 of those games. Jacob, have you played any of those?
I haven't had a chance to play any of those, but The Mind has been recommended to me on many occasions, so that one will probably get played sooner rather than later.
Yeah, it's a crazy game that shouldn't work, because it's like literally you're trying to read the mind of your other teammates, which, you can't do. So, Jacob, what have you been playing this week?
Because of South by and because of obligations before that, I have not had a chance to play a video game or a tabletop game in over 2 weeks. However, I polled my RPG group during South by and said, what do you want to play next? And they all unanimously voted for Fantasy Flight Star Wars Edge of the Empire RPG. So I'm currently designing a miniature campaign of 5 or 6 sessions for that. So here's my question for the Slash Film readership and the Slash Film Daily listeners. Since we're all Star Wars fans here, would you be interested in either reports on this show or articles of some kind that are essentially play sessions explaining, what happened in a fictional session of Star Wars adventures starring characters probably all made up from scratch from around the table with some maybe familiar elements? Would you be interested in reports from a fictional corner of the Star Wars universe that describe how the game itself functions and the choices players make, what impact may be having on our little corner of the Star Wars universe they're making up? If this interests you at all, let me know. The game's happening no matter what, but I'm trying to decide if it's worth my time to, keep a little diary of events and so people can maybe see what fun is had or what crazy things happen. So let me know on Twitter, email the show. I genuinely want to know if it's something that you would be interested in as a Slash Film devotee.
Okay. We have officially hit the end of the water cooler. You can find Chris's Pet Sematary review linked in the show notes. You can find all of us at slashfilm.com. You can find this podcast, Slash Film Daily, every weekday on iTunes, Google, Overcast, Spotify, all the popular podcast apps. Please feel free to send us your feedback, questions, comments, concerns to us at peter@slashfilm.com. And please head on over to our iTunes page, give us a 5-star review, tell your friends, spread the word. We'll see you tomorrow.
Hey, Peter.
Do we really have time for this today, Jacob?
I know the show is long, but this is very important. And because I'm keeping a record of all my books, I can tell you that the Gargantuan Book of Insult, Offense, and Effrontery by Louis A. Safian is currently filed. This will change as I add more books. Between Book of the Dead, The Complete History of Zombie Cinema by Jamie Russell, and Usagi Yojimbo, Samurai and Other Stories, Gallery Edition by Stan Sakai. So it's wedged between those two fellow masterpieces of literature. Are you ready?
No.
Well, too bad. HT, one time you were sick in bed for a week, and your secretary sent a sympathy card to your wife.
Oh. This one makes a lot of sense for me.
Yeah, that took me a little while connecting the dots there.
Well, Ben, the last time you were in the hospital, you got get well cards from all the nurses.
Get out of there, you.
Chris. Oh, Chris. He can become very unpleasant once you get to know him and owe him.
I
No.
I guess so. I don't know.
I don't even understand that one, Jacob.
Is once you get to know him, not know as in K-N-O-W, but
I guess if you just tell him no a bunch of times, he gets furious.
You tell Chris no, he becomes very unpleasant.
That's true. I get really angry.
Well, Brad, he likes people who arrive at firm convictions after they know what he thinks.
I mean, that
It doesn't even explicitly say that it has to match his. I don't understand.
I'm not upset by that.
Well, Peter hates those know-it-alls, those who insist he's wrong. These jokes were dedicated to the Slash Film listeners and readers I met in line at South by Southwest. You were all lovely. These jokes were told in your name. Amen.